things here on the table, and let me just tell you about them. We have a sling stone here. It lets us think about David and Goliath. It also lets us think about the attack on Jerusalem that we'll talk about tonight, because we're going to talk about the Jew, the Arab, the Christian, and Jerusalem, and how Jerusalem has fallen many times, been completely destroyed 3 times. But we think about this. But there's also something unusual up here. There's some other kind of sling stones, and I won't tell you about them. I'll let you come by and look at them, because they're very heavy, and probably what David used against Goliath. And so you can actually see these very interesting sling stones. By the way, the slingers, they say, can actually sling some of this at about the same speed of a .45 bullet. And so when you think about the David and Goliath story, probably Goliath was outgunned from the beginning, right? A little different than we often think about it. And but anyway, we're not talking about David and Goliath tonight. There's another Asherah goddess up here that you'll see, and there's a nice little glass vial that is not a test tube, it's a tear bottle. The ancients would collect their tears in a bottle, and then under times of extreme emotion and sorrow, pour out a lifetime of sorrow. And so when we think about the woman washing Jesus' feet, she's not down there with an onion under the table, crying. She's pouring out from her tear bottle. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along, but I'm going to show you some pictures tonight that tie in with the tear bottle. So again, each night there's also some Greek spearheads up here and some different things like that. Now, when folks were up here earlier, they were asking me about a couple of these things, and we have a nice cuneiform tablet and then it's on clay, and then we have a tablet up here that is on loan that is in stone. And there's an interesting thing about how writing develops. So it develops in a place called Uruk. So what they were doing is let's just say they were sending 5 big pieces of gold. So they would take 5 balls, right? And they would put them into an envelope, a clay envelope, and close the envelope up. And then the guy would take that to where he was going, deliver it. The guy would break the envelope and count the balls and count the gold or the bales of hay or whatever it might be, and everything checked out. Makes sense, right? That's kind of arduous, isn't it, to break it every time? So then they said, well, why don't we just write down 5 lines on the outside of this, right? And then you don't have to break it open unless you need to break it open. And then they said, well, why should we even put the balls inside? This is the way writing, ultimate, very beginning, develops at a place called Uruk in Mesopotamia. And so writing really starts there in this kind of practical way. Then they start using a stylus, and they start using a piece of a reed, and it's kind of as a stylus, and they would go into clay. And so here's actually a cuneiform tablet, and they were actually going into the clay like this. Now, we talked about hieroglyphs the first night, and we had a scale copy of the Rosetta Stone. The original is 4 feet high. This is about 1 foot high, so this is a 25% size, and it had 3 bands of writing. Remember, it had hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek on the bottom. Now, hieroglyphs was 2,500 characters. That's a lot, right? So you had to be a full-time scholar to read and write. So very cumbersome. It was picture writing like we talked about. Remember, I think I told you that if you wanted to write bee leaf, you draw a picture of a bee and a leaf, right? So it's very cumbersome. So something dramatic happens in the Sinai. Now, people didn't go to the Sinai, especially this place called Sarabit el-Qadim. It was the turquoise mines in the Sinai. People didn't go out there. I've been there. I took a great scholar, William Shea, to look at some inscriptions out there, and it was the worst place I've ever been in my life. It was about 120 degrees and 120% humidity, if they could be that high, and it was just really no sun, no shade anywhere. It was very, very rough. But something happened out there. The Egyptians would go out there only to mine turquoise in the wintertime, right? So they go out in the wintertime. So over 1,500 years, they mine turquoise out there. And they have a temple to an Egyptian goddess or an Egyptian god called Hathor. Now, some of you will know right away that Hathor was the cow goddess. Keep that in the back of your mind. When the children of Israel are there, they said, this guy, Moses, we don't know where he went, but this God knows how to take us out of here. And what was it? A golden calf, but it was actually Hathor, the patron goddess of the Sinai for the Egyptians. That was their god. So anyway, there was a big temple to Hathor out there. And so the Phoenicians were coming down, and the Phoenicians couldn't read and write. And some of their foremen did something very unique, a big step. They took 26 of these pictures and let them represent 26 sounds. So their word for a bull was an aleph. Aleph. How would you draw a bull? In picture, in simple things, right? Like that? Horns? They let that represent the sound ah. Now look what we've done. Ah. You see it? Our A comes right from there. Their word for house was Beit. So we have Bethlehem, house of bread, Bethsaida, house of fish. And you have they just draw a little box like that. Look what we've done. Ba, right? Ba. Their word for water was Mayim. How would you draw water? Maybe like the waves of the sea? Im. So all of our written alphabets come from this. Now the problem was they were still drawing pictures of these sounds. So they went back to Phoenicia, and the scholars got a hold of it in Phoenicia, and they dropped the pictures and used abstract signs, or abstract pictures, abstract drawings, I should say, markings, to represent the 26 sounds, and that became the world's first alphabet. And where was that? In Phoenicia. So what is that called? Come on. Phonics, of course. Phonics. So that's why we have this replica here as the world's first alphabet. And this happens at a place called Ugarit in Syria, which is ancient Phoenicia. And so all of our alphabet actually descends from this alphabet. All of our written alphabets, not the Asian alphabets and so on, the Chinese, but all of our written alphabets. So it's pretty exciting to see. Now, before we start, I was asked a question or two about tours and the Bible lands and so on. Some of you asked me asked questions about that. I don't often promote things. We do teaching tours. The Biblical World does teaching tours. Every spring we do a teaching tour, except for the last 2 springs because of COVID, in Israel and Jordan. We do a 2-week tour in Israel and 3 days in Jordan. And we try and do it in mid-March because that's the most beautiful time of year to be there. It's green, it's pretty, and we try and avoid the religious holidays. We also do a tour in Egypt after going down and filming in Egypt recently. Got very excited about Egypt, and so we've been doing an Egypt in the Bible tour in the fall of the year, usually in November. We had filmed in October, and I said, well, this is good weather. We went the next October with a tour group, and it was about 110 degrees down in Aswan, and I said, this is not good weather. So the next year we went in November, and it was perfect weather. So still had some good mangoes and things like that, good fruits and so on, but it was not too overbearing. So, and then every other year in the fall, we do a Footsteps of Paul tour in Greece and Turkey, following in the footsteps of Paul. So you can go onto our website if you'd like more information about some of those tours. It's biblicalworld.org, and you probably don't have that anywhere, but that's what it is, biblicalworld.org. We also, some of you asked about some of our programs. This is our latest program called The World of the Patriarchs. We do beautiful teaching study guides, kind of looks like this. And I believe maybe one day I'll come here to Battle Creek and maybe share this with the group like this, but you can kind of see what it's like. There's beautiful maps. And we have this for the footsteps of Paul, and we have this for the footsteps of Jesus. There's 28 programs in that. And we have this for the patriarchs, and we're working right now on one for the world of the Exodus. And we're actually covering the whole Bible. So someone asked about these programs. I've given the church permission to record these, and they're going to be on their website at least for a while. So if you want to share them with folks and friends, you should be able to do that without a problem. We one day will record these on location is the idea, to actually go to all the sites and tell these stories when they happened. But in the meantime, I'm working on the grand narrative. That's actually 7 volumes with 7 episodes each, or 49 volumes. So we just did the World of the Patriarchs. Starts post-flood and goes through the time of Joseph being sold into slavery. And right now we're editing the world of the Exodus. Picks up with Joseph in Egypt and Jacob coming to Egypt and goes through the Judges. And then next spring we intend to film the world of the Kings and the world of the prophets. So we'll be covering basically the whole Bible that way, and on location with beautiful study guides and so on. But enough of that commercial stuff. I want to talk to you tonight about Jerusalem. How many have been to Jerusalem? Okay, a few of you have been to Jerusalem. So I used to call this program The Jew, the Arab, and Jerusalem, but as I mentioned, that many Christians and Muslims are Arabs. So it's really the Jew, the Christian, the Muslim, and Jerusalem, to be more accurate. So the city of Jerusalem has long been divided into 4 quarters: the Jewish, Arab, Christian, and Armenian quarter, and there we can see them on the screen. It's a tremendous city. It is a religious significance for most of the world. Over 50% of the world trace their roots to spiritual Jerusalem. It can't boast the pyramids like Egypt that we looked at, or the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, or the Acropolis of Greece, but this land alone lays title to the claim Holy Land, right? Now, I'll let you in on a secret. I don't find a lot holy there. Sorry, don't stone me tonight, or even throw tomatoes. I like to call it the Bible lands, because it's where the story of the Bible happened. And that's what brings it to life for me. I get there and find it's very often very graceless. Many people there don't understand grace. And so, to be honest, I'm always happy when I get back to America. We debate whether we live in a Christian country or a post-Christian country. We live in the memory of being in a Christian country. And so we live in the memory of grace and of treating people very nice, and treating people better than we should probably treat them, to be honest, sometimes, right? And so we live in that memory of that. And so I always enjoy being back here because of that. But it is the place where the biblical stories happened. And I love to see the biblical stories come to life. We shot a pilot that we called Mysteries of the Fifth Gospel, and I was telling some of the folks about Bargel Pixner. He's a Dominican scholar that was in Jerusalem for about 25 years, and he wrote a wonderful line. I've plagiarized it. He said, there are 5 Gospels that tell the story of Jesus. 4 you will find in books, and 1 you will find in the land they call holy. Understand the 5th Gospel, the Holy Land, and the world of the 4 Gospels will open before you. And that's what we want to share with you tonight. We did last night, and the next couple of nights we'll be trying to bring that world of the Bible to life, to go from black and white to living color, right? So we see it's sacred as a spiritual epicenter for the 3 monotheistic religions: Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And so they're attracted to the city of Jerusalem. This is the center for it. While it means city of peace, Jerusalem, it's not peaceful there on that gate. That's not mothballs. You know what that is? Bullets. That's from 1948 and again from 1967 when they were fighting with the Jordanians and the Israelis. This is the gate that goes into the Jewish quarter. So while it's called the City of Peace, it's been subject to multiple conflicts throughout the centuries and actually been totally destroyed 3 times, razed 3 times, once by Nebuchadnezzar and then twice by the Romans, 70 AD and 132 AD, or 135 AD, I should say. So Jerusalem, when you look at it for the first time, what stands out are these walls. Do you see the walls? We don't know about walled cities in America, but the walls of Jerusalem have been very, very important. So today, the old city is inside the walls of the city. This is on the eastern side, and in an age of mortars and aerial combat, we don't need walled cities, but this has been very, very important to Jerusalem through its lengthy 4,000-year history, the walls of Jerusalem. So a couple of years ago, my goodness, maybe in 1989, I was in Jerusalem. It was during the Intifada. I had visited with some Palestinian shepherds along the wall, the same walls I was just showing you. They were letting their sheep kind of feed there, and this major little artery going by, and we were chatting, and I had my 10-year-old son there, and a colleague had his 15-year-old son with him, and we walked across the Hinnom Valley over to where we were staying, and as we walked across, I heard, da-da-da-da-da. My friend said, oh, firecrackers. I said, no, Uzi. I said, you take the boys and go to the room. I'm going back to see what happened. I went back over, and it turned out in this instance to be a Jewish zealot. Came by with an Uzi and unloaded it into the very men we'd just been talking to. And killed one and wounded 3 of the others. And so I thought about how things had changed. See the blood on the wall there? That's what I shot the next morning where the person had been killed. And so there's atrocities that happen on each side because of the, who knows what. Anyway, the anger, the resentment, the misunderstandings. And I thought how things had changed. I'd been there in 1986 for my first trip, and everything was kind of calm and peaceful. You understood a little bit of restlessness behind the scenes. But this time it was the intifada. Intifada means the uprising. It was the uprising out in the open. And so things are being closed early in the day. And so it was very, very tense. There are 8 gates that open into the old city of Jerusalem. That one doesn't open. That's 9th gate. That one is called the Messiah's gate, you might say. And so the Golden Gate, it faces to the east. By the way, that's a Muslim cemetery there. And they've closed up the gate. That gate is from the time of Suleiman the Magnificent from the 16th century, the Turkish ruler, the Ottoman ruler who was there. And there's another gate. An acquaintance of mine was actually there and fell through and got his camera and got a couple of pictures of the gate below that would go back to the time of King Herod. But this gate is very interesting. And I've had, can I tell you a little story? It's Sunday night. You've missed any football, right? So can I tell you a story? Is that okay? We were filming the footsteps of Jesus there, and we were filming from this perspective because you have to realize that the Mount of Jerusalem is here on Mount Zion. Over here is the Mount of Olives. In between is the Kidron Valley, right? Mount of Olives is actually about 400 feet higher, right? Around 2,900 feet. Jerusalem's around 2,500 square feet high. And so when you look across, you're actually looking up to the Mount of Olives. So I was trying to film the Mount of Olives to talk about Passover. And we'd come in, we'd film there, and everything worked out pretty good. Came back to film again, and the Israeli soldiers wouldn't let us film in there. And I said, what's going on? And I'm trying to argue with them because we filmed in here a couple of times, and what's going on? And finally they said, okay, and people were up on the wall. You could walk on the ramparts of the wall. Behind that, you can kind of see the little places. If you look carefully, those little slits are to be able to shoot arrows out, right like that. And so we were there, and I smile a lot. There were about 6 men that came walking, and they had, you know what a mattocks is here in this part of the world? You use mattocks? A mattocks is kind of like a hoe on one side and an axe on the other side. You know what I'm talking about? For chopping roots. They're coming with some of these mattocks, and I'm thinking, they're going to get close enough where we can't run. And I'm trying to smile, and they're not smiling back. I'm thinking, this is what the soldiers are trying to warn us about. This was not a good thing to be here. And they come in faster, and I'm trying to smile, and we can't go anywhere. And they walk right past us, and then I notice they're carrying a little tiny rug about this long in their arms. They turn next to us, and they start digging, and they buried a little child in their cemetery. Don't be afraid in that part of the world is what I'm trying to tell you. Don't be afraid in that part of the world. So anyway, there's a Muslim cemetery there. Now, many people believe, many evangelical people believe the Muslims did that on purpose because they believe Jews can't walk over a cemetery, so the Jews can't go through the Golden Gate when the Messiah comes and opens it. I really don't believe that, but anyway, that's what some people believe. This is the only gate that opens to the east. It's called the Lion's Gate. You can see those embossed lions, or St. Stephen's Gate. We used to believe St. Stephen was taken through this gate. This is the gate that the locals, that is the local Muslims, will go into the Dome of the Rock or to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and so you can see they're kind of funneling into that gate. We come around to the north, and there's this gate. It's very interesting. It's called Herod's Gate, or the Flower Gate, because of the embossed flower that you can see there. And it's not used by a lot of people, but it is quite interesting gate. And then the most busy gate on the north side is called the Damascus Gate, because the road from here would go to Damascus. And you can kind of see this gate. It's very impressive. In my tours, I take you down when you get there at night to see this because it's so impressive. And back in the day, As I said again, I'm going to comment on the walls. The walls are built by Suleiman the Magnificent. You can actually walk on the ramparts. You can pay to walk on the ramparts. You can see all those slits and so on. That's where they could fight from inside. This is not actually the wall from the time. All the walls from the time of Jesus, with a few exceptions, were destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, and then totally destroyed in 135 AD, and then rebuilt by Hadrian. So Hadrian rebuilt a wall here, and if you go closely, you can look down, you can actually see the original wall is underneath this, and the original gate is underneath this. This gate does not date to the time of Jesus, but slightly after the time of Jesus, when this other wall was built, and then it was rebuilt by the Romans. We come a little further and we find a very interesting gate called the New Gate. It's called the New Gate because Kaiser Wilhelm wanted to have his chariot taken into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and so he didn't want to have to go upstairs and so on, so they actually cut this gate and opened it through the wall for him there in the beginning of the 20th century. This is the Jaffa Gate. The Jaffa Gate goes to Joppa, or Jaffa, Tel Aviv today, and so it would go out this direction. This is the gate that if you go to Jerusalem as a tourist, you're going to go through. Almost all the tourists pass through into the old city through this gate. It connects to the more Jewish section of Jerusalem. We come around to the west and we come to the Zion Gate. The Zion Gate has really been refurbished now, so this picture is a little bit more updated than the one I showed you earlier. And this gate is very beautiful. This gate actually takes you kind of into the Armenian quarter and also to the Jewish quarter. So remember we said there were 4 quarters of Jerusalem on the inside. Cars actually go through this. I've actually driven cars through that gate. It's really tricky to get around all the pilgrims and tourists. This is the Dung Gate. Now the Dung Gate is interesting because the Dung Gate goes to the Temple Mount. So the idea is in the old times that they would take the dung, and the carcasses of animals, and they take it out through this gate and they go out into the Hinnom Valley and they would burn them, and that's where we get the word Gehenna, right? Gehenna or hell, because they would take it out into the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, and they would burn it, and it would be burning all the time, and the fire wouldn't go out because they're all the time burning stuff. Now, that's a very interesting gate, so when you're going into the Western Wall to pray, you would usually go through this gate or into the Jewish quarter. And I have to tell you, I spent over a year in Jerusalem, and I think I get lost no matter what gate I go through. It's still kind of fun to wander around and go through the various kinds of markets. There's clothing markets and spice markets, and there's meat markets. Look at all the beautiful dried fruit, and just a wonderful thing just to wander around the streets of old Jerusalem. Now, back in 1987, I was there with my son in that same trip when we had the shooting, and the first time I ever tasted tear gas was right here. They shot canisters of tear gas. It was the uprising, the Intifada. And so we had to come out of the Damascus Gate, trying to get our ears and eyes cleared and so on, and get away from the tear gas. You can see my son's friend holding his nose there as we busted out the gate. I was also there in 2001 during a car bombing, and I thought how things have changed in this city of peace. Now today things are quite calm in perspective of recent times in Jerusalem. So I would not be afraid to go to Jerusalem at all. As a matter of fact, I go there quite often. But there's no market I'd rather go to than the ancient souk of old Jerusalem. As you wander through the streets, it's just wonderful, all the fruit stands and the stands that are selling different kinds of goods, whether it's for olive wood in Bethlehem or inlaid boxes from Damascus or coins that have been unearthed in digs or Bedouin garments that soft, hello, hello, beckons you to come in and sit down and sip tea and converse with the shopkeeper. And none but the most iron-willed will leave without buying something. By the way, haggling is an ancient custom in the bazaar, and so they put a big price on it, and some people pay it, but most people don't. You know to haggle, and it's almost like an art form, but how beautiful they keep their shops. Baklava, do you like that? It's made with walnuts in this part of the world, and that part of the world it's made with pistachios. And I've eaten many a kilo of it, as you can tell. And it's kept me going many a time. This guy was making some kind of a pancake there in old Jerusalem one time. I bought a kilo of it, and have to be honest, I fed it to the birds along the trip. It wasn't too tasty. But there's always an abundance of fruits and vegetables. Look at those eggplants. Oh my, always so many. This is right in the Damascus Gate as you're walking through all of this. You got to walk around all of it. Very exciting. Now this Bedouin lady was very interesting. She had carried a box of oranges and fruit on her head, and her blouse and carried the scales, and she could set up shop on a moment's notice. But I discovered that she had two prices, one for me and one for everyone else. Look at this beautiful, isn't this beautiful, the spice markets? This is my good friend here. We actually did some filming in his shop, but look at this. It's called za'atar, and za'atar they put on their bread with olive oil, and they kind of put this hyssop, and I forget what all's in it right now, but he made that beautiful little thing that would attract attention to his shop, and really enjoy going to his shop. I'm a vegetarian, and I try and avoid this, but I always end up there for some reason, the meat market. Go figure. Jerusalem, as I said, is sacred to the three monotheistic religions. Christians are drawn here because here Jesus died and came back to life. Jews are drawn here because here's the western wall. The temple was built on the platform above this, and they come to remember that and to pray. In the past, they came to wail. Now they wail one day a week, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. And it's holy to Muslims because here they believe Muhammad left Mecca on his trusty steed, the Al-Buraq, came to Jerusalem, to this very spot, and then went to heaven from that on his horse, and then went to Mount Sinai and to Beth, and so on. So it became the holiest place in the Muslim world. Today it's the third holiest after Mecca and Medina, where Muhammad was born and died. And so it's holy to all these three religions. Now, to understand this, and before we really go and look at some of these in detail, I thought it might be helpful to go down to Hebron. Down in Hebron is where Abraham was buried, and it helps us to see the relationship and why the people trace their roots to Father Abraham. So down here we have the Cave of Machpelah. That's the only building built by King Herod still standing. He built it over the Cave of Machpelah where the patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. So Abraham is buried here, Isaac and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah. Rachel died on the way down to visit her father-in-law on the way down to visit him here, and she died her grandfather, Isaac, was also living here. Anyway, Leah is there, Rachel's buried in Bethlehem. So we don't really know if they're buried there or not. They don't like to do a lot of archaeology. There was one time when they let a child down through that hole. But this is where you can look down supposedly and see the Cave of Machpelah. It's got the tightest security in the land. When you go there, I've not been anywhere that's more difficult to get through with security. There was an atrocity back in the 40s when Muslims came in and killed Jews. There was an atrocity back in the 90s when a doctor from Brooklyn came in with his gun, and here you can see where the bullets came off, and killed about 22 Muslims that were worshiping for Friday prayers. So today is totally separated. When I first went there, they were all together. Today there's a section over here for Muslims and a section over here for Jews. So the Jewish people get to go to see Jacob, and they get to go to see Leah, and they can look through and see Abraham and Sarah's tomb, but they don't have access to it. That's on the Muslim side today. We want to go down a little further from there and try and understand the world of Abraham down in Beersheba. Now this is a very interesting well, a beautiful well. It doesn't really date to the time of Abraham, but it helps us to understand the world of Abraham because Abraham was a Bedouin. He was a Bedouin shepherd who lived in a tent, moved from place to place. He's actually roaming up and down the mountain range of modern Israel or the West Bank or Palestine, whatever you want to call it. So this is Tel Beersheba. Doesn't really date to that time. When my son was 10, he was on this trip, and my two friends, I decided to save money and actually sleep at the Tel. I got up long before they did at sunrise because I wanted to try and capture the world of Abraham, and so I was walking down the wadi. As I walked down the wadi, there were herds of camels, and there were flocks of goats and sheep, and they were going down, and I came upon this water hole, and I thought about Abraham because here this family was actually cleaning their sheep before shearing them. You can see the brother and sister, the young ones are trying to get the sheep to get into the water, and sheep doesn't want to have a bath. He's pulling him by the ears, trying to get him in, and he's resisting. Finally, he gets him in, goes from the brother to brother, and finally the father does the inspection, just like you might expect. And then we can see the animal trying to get out on the other side, just soggy, and then they would dry it and shear it and that would be the way it would be. I came back and found that my 10-year-old had gotten up and wandered down into the wadi also. He made friends with a Bedouin boy. The Bedouin boy invited him to ride a camel, so he was pretty happy about that. And the Bedouin boy got on the camel. They rode together. They couldn't speak the same language, but they did speak the same language, didn't they? They knew how to play. And you know what? People are the same around the world. They have the same needs around the world, right? And so I had a delightful time there with the boy. Well, as I said, Beersheba doesn't really go back to the time of Abraham, but it lets us see what Abraham's life would have been like, especially with the well, because the Bible says Abraham dug a well. Beersheba means the well of the seven, or the well of the oath. Beer as well, Sheba or Shova. So anyway, it's the well of the seven, the well of the oath. That's a tamarisk tree, by the way. So those of you who study the Bible will remember that Abraham came here and planted a tamarisk tree beside the well. And I always love to go there. It's one of my favorite places to visit in the land. Now, last night we talked about the Nuzi tablets. Do you remember that? How the Nuzi tablets talked about what the Mesopotamian custom was or law was. If a woman did not have a child, she could choose a surrogate to raise a child for her. So somehow in this whole story of Abraham and Sarah, the 10 years pass in the land of promise and there's no pregnancy. And so Sarah arranges a surrogate. She arranges a surrogate by the name of Hagar. I saw a road the other day around here called Hagar Road. Of Hagar. You know what Hagar means? Flight. Run away. Because that's what she did. She ran away. So anyway, she is brought in, and like the law said, now, ladies, who chooses the surrogate? The wife. She probably goes, I'm going to look for those beautiful women and all anywhere. I'm going to search high and low. You think so? No, you know better than that, right? But this is very interesting. Who does Sarah choose? Her handmaid from where? From Egypt. Remember what happened in Egypt? Abraham said, she's my sister. And she's taken into Pharaoh's harem. And the plan is almost ruined by Abraham's lack of faith and allowing her to say that that's my sister. And so she got handmaids there. And so when Sarah says, I remember when you did this to me down in Egypt, I want to give you my handmaid from Egypt, Hagar, and let her bear you a son. Kind of interesting, isn't it? So anyway, the older lady would choose a younger lady, and so there's a surrogate. And so she is a surrogate. She gets pregnant. And boy, it doesn't go too well. Sarah gets a little upset, begins working hard on her. The Bible says, treated her pretty harshly, and she ran away. She ran away. And she went out, and while she's out in the desert, she falls down, and she's crying. And the Lord appears to her and sends her back. And she goes back, and then she has Ishmael, and 14 years later, by the way, Ishmael means God hears. You can see L on the end, E-L, Ishmael, God hears. I've heard your prayer, name him Ishmael, I'll make a great nation out of him. But 14 years later, Sarah has Isaac. And now there's real conflict. And so once again, Hagar leaves. She's told to leave, and she takes off with her boy Ishmael. And remember the story? They can't find any water. She thinks he's going to die. And there the Lord appears to her and points to the water, and she gives God a new name. She's the only person in Scripture to give God a name. El Roy. El is God, Roy is see, the God who sees. Hagar, I see you and Ishmael and what you're going through. It's okay, I love you. Right? I love you. I've heard your cries. I haven't forgotten you. I won't forget your son either. God hears. Isn't that beautiful? God appeared to her on her knees there. Ishmael was to be the father of 12 rulers. They're the Arabs of that part of the world today. We've traced their lineage back to that. We see that Isaac, the other son that Abraham had, would have 2 boys. And if I can stay on this one, maybe I'll stay on this one for a moment. And that's Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons, and that's the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's name has changed from Jacob to Israel. That God prevails or God fights. And so we see these guys are the descendants of Isaac. And then there's another brother that another son that Isaac has, Esau or Edom. And last night we talked about Petra and how that Petra was really where the Edomites were living. And then, well, let me say this. I don't have a picture for this one. There's another character who was with Abraham. What was his name? The nephew? Lot. And Lot has daughters, but later he has two sons or grandsons, or they're both. And what were their names? Moab and Ammon. And today there's the second large city in Jordan's called Madaba, Moab. And Ammon is the capital of Jordan. So they really are the people who live in the land of Jordan today. So what am I trying to say? All these people are connected. They're all related together. And so actually, Isaac and Ishmael came together for a joint burial for their father. They got along together okay. Ishmael was living in a different territory. Isaac was inheriting the land over here, but they got along together and came together. The Bible says that Abraham was told to take his son, the only son, the Yaqid son, the one that he loved, and offer him on Mount Moriah. And so Jewish and Christian in the Bible says that's Isaac, but Muslims believe that's Ishmael. And they believe that Mount Moriah is not in Jerusalem. They believe Mount Moriah instead is in Mecca. And that's why they go to Mecca every year on the Hajj or the pilgrimage. And yet the Bible tells us that Moriah is in Jerusalem. And of course, Abraham went to Salem and paid tithe to Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the priest king of Salem there. And so this is a very special place, Salem. Later would be called Jerusalem or Jerusalem. And so the Canaanites are living there, the Jebusites, that's where he gets its name. Look at that, isn't that a formidable wall? It's actually that deep ravine going down into the Kidron Valley. And very, very deep, but they had this incredible wall, so fortified city, you might say. And when King David comes along, he wants to move the capital from Hebron to Jerusalem. But the Canaanites Joshua chased them out, but now the Canaanites have come back and lived there. They're entrenched. And so David wants to make this his capital. He wants to make this the religious and political capital of one place. And the people inside, according to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6, "You'll never get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They were so confident inside their walled city. You hear them just taunting them, right? So it's interesting. David says, according to the text, on that day, David said, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. What's the water shaft? Well, there you can see it. Now, if you could get to that point, you can actually drop a bucket on a rope all the way down into a spring and have water. The problem is that was outside the walls of the ancient city. It was outside the walls of the ancient city. So what the Canaanites did is, the Jebusites, they dug a shaft, sloping shaft going down, and there's some stairs going down outside, underneath. They're tunneling underneath the walls of the city, and then they could drop it all the way down. Charles Warren found this back in 1870, by the way. And today you can actually walk it out, just like I'm walking here. You can actually walk down and see it. Now I want to try and give you a little better perspective. Here you can see that little finger. You see the little red finger? That's Jerusalem in the days of Jesus. I'm sorry, the day of David. Very small. Sorry, whatever pictures you've seen. Very, very small. You can see the Kidron Valley on the one side, and there's another valley called the Tripian Valley on the other side, and it's very, very small. That little sliver of a finger. Today it's outside the walls of the modern city of Jerusalem. Let's see if we can go in a little bit closer. You see where I have the little circle? That's where the spring is. It's called the Gihon Spring, or the gushing spring, because it gushes. It would not run from it, and it would gush. In the old days when we go there, you could see it gushing. They control it today, so it doesn't do that. So you'd have to go outside. Well, it was fine to go outside during times of peace, but if there's some enemies coming, you can't go outside, right? And so that's when they would go down through that sloping tunnel underneath the wall, and then drop their bucket down and bring their water inside. So David said, the only way we're going to get in there is to take that water shaft. Well, the Jebusites had obviously camouflaged this. And the Bible talks about how that Joab took a little guerrilla band, and they snuck in, and they climbed up the shaft, and they came into the city, and they opened the gates of the city, and they took the city for David. Pretty cool, huh? And you actually go and see that today. Now, when the Assyrians were coming in the days of Hezekiah, the Assyrians were the bad guys of history. They came from like Mosul in Iraq, in the mountains up there. They were the bad guys. They would flay the leaders alive. So you didn't want to be caught by these guys. If you're a leader, they flay you. That means they cut your skin off and hang it on the gates of the city. They impale people. They're really the bad guys of the ancient world. Well, they're coming. Hezekiah, what will he do? He goes over to Isaiah and Isaiah says, we've got to pray. They have a revival. That's good, right? But he believed in faith and works, so he realized we've got to do more than pray. We've got a water source outside the city, and if they get a hold of that water source, they'll come right in the city. So look what he does. He builds a tunnel. Here I'm walking in it. It's called Hezekiah's tunnel. He builds a tunnel to take the water from outside the city inside the city, right? Now the Assyrians are coming. They're taking all the cities they've already taken the cities of Israel, and now they're coming down to Judah, and they're taking the cities of Judah. And so you can just imagine these guys, they're chipping both ways because the bad guys of history are coming. Now as you walk along, if you look carefully, you might even be able to see the chip marks of the axes are going this way and this way because they're coming from two different directions. But they miss. They miss by about 6 feet. So I'm always feeling whenever I walk along and trying to point out to people I have with me where they met, right? Because you can actually feel the chip marks in the walls. In the rock. So the bad guys are coming and they're building this, trying to get it in. Now, it's wonderful. We have this story in the Bible, but they found a plaque from the time that tells how they built it. It's in the Istanbul Museum, and they made a replica of it, and they have it right here in the tunnel where I'm standing. Isn't that exciting? That's very interesting. I can't tell you that story. It's very interesting how that was found. I'll tell you real quick. It was Horatio Spafford. You remember Horatio Spafford? Horatio Spafford's wife and daughters were going to Jerusalem. I'm sorry, they were going across the Atlantic on a ship, remember? Ship hit an iceberg, went down. Mom was saved, the girls were lost. He gets a telegram, come quickly. Gets on it, he tells the captain, show me where it happened. He sees where it happens. He took out his pen and he wrote a beautiful poem called It Is Well With My Soul. That's why it talks about it. That's why it moves our hearts so much, you know? Well, they don't have any kids anymore, so what they do? They move to Jerusalem. They start the American colony in Jerusalem, a religious colony, and they adopt children. They take in orphans. Isn't that beautiful? They dedicate their lives to taking in orphans. And one of the orphans they took in found that plaque. So it's pretty special whenever I think about that. Yeah. Anyway, this is what the plaque says. When the tunnel was driven through, while we were still axe each man toward his fellow, in other words, they're coming from different directions, and while there were 3 cubits, the cubit's a foot and a half, so there was 4.5 feet to be cut through, there was heard the voice of a man calling to, hey, hey, right? They could hear each other, for there was an overlap in the rock on the right and on the left. They were missing each other, so there was about 4.5 feet of rock between them, but they could hear each other. And when the tunnel was driven through, the quarrymen hewed the rock, each man toward his fellow, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring toward the reservoir for 1,200 cubits. That's 1,800 feet, right? And the height of the rock above the heads of the quarrymen was 100 cubits. It's 150 feet underground. Isn't that exciting? Because the bad guys are coming. They're going to flay you alive. And so they're working. But they're not just working. They're praying. There's a revival that's going on. And God does something special. He spares Judah from the destruction of the Assyrians. God intervenes and they're delivered from that. So it comes out on this pool of Siloam now. It doesn't look much like the pool of Siloam. Kids like to come here and swim and play. And my son, when he was 10, he was trying to remember what happened. Jesus put some clay on the guy's eyes and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam, right? So go down. They actually built a church here. So that's why, today they've actually excavated a huge pool. The pool's bigger than this sanctuary. Huge pool. The pool of Siloam. There was a water source inside the city. Herod had built that big one to commemorate that. So anyway, Hezekiah builds a wall, and this is called Hezekiah's broad wall. Look at that, how thick it was. Because refugees are flowing in everywhere throughout Judah. The bad guys are coming. People are taking refuge, so the city expands greatly to take in all these refugees. He builds this big, broad wall. You can see how deep it is in different places. because Jerusalem's full of hills and valleys. So here you can see one of the valleys, and they have to dig down all the way down to have their walls there. And so he digs all this, and they're now safe, and the Assyrians are not able to get there. So it's interesting. Here's some ostraca that were found at a place called Hezekiah. And may my Lord know that we are watching the fire signals of Lachish, according to all the signs which my Lord arranged, for we can no longer see the signals of Hezekiah. They're giving signal fires, but one of the cities has now fallen in Judah, and they know that they're next on the list. And so it's a terrible time, a difficult time. As I said, the Assyrians were the rough guys of the past. So they come, they try to intimidate, but they can't take the city. God delivers the city. Here's Lachish. When they went to Lachish, you can actually see what they're doing. They have these battle rams they're able to go up and knock down. They used a very interesting technology. They captured Jews, and they made the Jews do the work up by the wall. And the Jews inside wouldn't kill their brothers, and so they just watched it happen. And the whole place is destroyed. But God delivered Hezekiah, and Sennacherib went back to his palace in Assyria and Iraq, and he wrote this on his prism. He said, Hezekiah the Jew was shut up like a bird in a cage. But it's sour grapes because he couldn't capture it. He had him shut up in there, but he couldn't capture the city because God delivered them. How wonderful is that? But 100 years later, another guy comes from Iraq. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. He comes down and he attacks the city. He destroys these walls, breaks into the city, and takes the city during the days of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is no longer open, but this was an Israelite tower, part of Hezekiah's wall, his great wall, but a tower. And when they first found this, they made a little special museum to show you how the Babylonians came in. They were breaking into the stones, as you can see. They were building fires, weakening it, and they found that. Can you look at that? You know what that is? Babylonian spearheads expended in the battle over Jerusalem in the days of Daniel and Jeremiah. And so again, it happened just like the Bible said. And there's the evidence. They even found ash on the wall. Unfortunately, that's not open anymore. The Persians allowed them Jews to return in 515 and rebuild their temple, which they did. Things went well for a while. And then Alexander the Great came through. Alexander the Great became a patron of the Jews because they were an ancient people, and according to a prophecy that they shared with him from Daniel chapter 8. So he was very sympathetic to the Jews. But there would be a future Greek king called Antiochus Epiphanes who would not be so kind. This guy, a descendant of Alexander's group, he thought that everybody in his empire should worship one God and only one God, Olympian Zeus. And so he comes down to Jerusalem, he sends an emissary down, and he gets one of the priests, leaders, and says, okay, I want you to sacrifice a pig on the altar. He said, I'm not going to sacrifice a pig on the altar. It's unclean. You can't desecrate the temple. This other priest said, I'll do it. You know what the priest does? Pulls out his sword, boom, boom. He kills the priest and kills the emissaries from Syria. And he takes his boys and he runs off into the woods. And one of his boys will be the Judas Maccabees we talked about the other night. This starts the Maccabean Wars, okay? And so they start fighting and fighting back and forth to try and liberate Jerusalem. Ultimately, they are liberated, and they're liberated, and then after being liberated, my slide went too quick on me. After being liberated, they rekindle the wall. So I'm sorry that was going wrong. They have something called Hanukkah. Hanukkah emerges out of it. They have the festival of light that takes place. And by the way, Jesus was able to celebrate the festival of light, the Bible tells us. So all this happens, but now it's the people now give way to what's called the Hasmonean rule. And so we have this beautiful little lamp up here. There's a Hasmonean lamp right there, right? And so they rule as kings, as priest kings. So this is the best time in the land as far as Jewish people are concerned, right? Because they're free for the first time since Daniel the prophet and Nebuchadnezzar. For almost 500 years, they're now free from foreign invaders. And they're pretty excited about it. Well, one of these guys comes, and he's not really a Maccabean. He's half Idumean or half Edomite, and Rome makes him the king. His name is Herod, and he rebuilds the temple. He rebuilds the city. He couldn't really expand the size of the temple, but he could expand the platform of the temple. So he expanded it. He made it the largest man-made gathering place in the ancient world. 3 times larger than the Esplanade, the Acropolis in Athens. 12 soccer fields with the bleachers could fit inside. Over 200,000 people could gather there. And it was a man-made gathering place, largest man-made gathering place. Now the rabbis didn't like Herod because Herod was half Edomite. He wasn't a Jew. His father was forced to convert to Judaism. Actually, his mother was a Nabatean from Petra, and his father was an Edomite, so he's not even half Jewish, but his father had converted. But they said, that doesn't really count. You can't be our king. But the Romans had made him. Mark Antony made him the king, so there's a problem. He rebuilt the temple, covered it with marble and gold everywhere. It was just the most beautiful building on the earth. And the rabbis had to say, he who has not set eyes upon the structure of Herod has not seen a structure of beauty in all of his life. They had to admit, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And we see some of this model used to be from the Holy Land Hotel, now it's at the Israel Museum, that tries to help us to understand what this was like. There was actually, you can kind of see the women's court going up and stopping there. And there's a little line where women can't go past that little line. There's another that's got the Gentile court, and there's a sign that actually says they found, and it says, if you pass this and you're a Gentile and you lose your life, we told you not to do it. Right? It's your own fault. Now, the problem with the temple is, see these big stones? They're 40 feet long, 36 to 40 feet long. The problem with the temple is it was built on a rock like this. So the rock coming down from North Jerusalem is very wide, and it gets narrower, okay, like this. And it gets narrower, and you come down into the Kidron Valley here, in the Tripian Valley, you can't just build on bedrock anymore. So Herod had to build these incredible structural walls. These structural walls that would go down over 100 feet deep down to bedrock. Now let's see if we can make this one move here. And so when I'm walking up here to the south part, you can actually see that right at the base of that is part of that rock. And if you go to the right, there's nothing there. It's just blank space and open space on the other side. This is called the Holdergate or the Triple Gate. Probably not original because it was filled in during the Crusades to try and protect it and to defend it. But you can see that Jesus would have walked in through those 3 gates, and there'd be 2 gates on the other side. He'd have come out. Herod widened the porch area with these columns. And by the way, when you see that solid stone there, that's the solid stone of the Temple Mount. And Herod was able to put up 164 Corinthian columns. You can kind of see the little well there. So there's a place where you'd come up and go out. So there's a place on the left side of the screen. You're not really seeing it. They'd come up that way. They go out that way. So the ordinary people, like Jesus at that time, as an ordinary citizen, they would be going in and out that gate. It's called the Mole Gate or the Holda Gate. But they were actually following the rock underneath and coming out into the court of the Gentiles. Here we can kind of see a little bit of what I'm talking about. You can see there were great bridges. We see remnants of them today. They're known as Wilson and Robinson's arches. You can see the bridges coming out from the Temple Mount, but the Temple Mount's very high and then coming down. There's a building behind that called the Antonia Fortress, named after Mark Antony. And so Herod built this at Rome's direction to have a fortress of soldiers that could be stationed nearby. Here's the base of that Robinson's Arch I was talking about. It was actually that big bridge that came out, and you can see it there, and it came down. And so they actually find the remnants of this in the archaeology of Jerusalem today. That's the Tripian Valley or the Tyropian Valley coming down to the Pool of Siloam. Up in the upper part of the city, there were some beautiful homes. This home has been excavated. It was a priestly home, a chief priest's home, maybe a high priest home, we don't know. I kind of think that it might even be where Jesus was tried by Herod. And you can kind of see the beautiful mosaics on the floor. You can see the stone instruments. They found a menorah in the plaster that's very different from the menorah on Titus's Arch in Rome. Here's the Antonia I was telling you about, the fortress of Antonia, named after Mark Antony. Some people believe that this is where Pilate judged Jesus. I do not believe that personally, but that's where the Stations of the Cross begin. So that's the tradition, but I think we now have more information. You can see it's overlooking the Temple Mount. This is where Paul, by the way, when he's taken and there's a riot, he's brought up into that tower over there to be protected and interrogated. Okay? So again, we can kind of see the Pool of Siloam down at the bottom. We can see the wealthy cities, and then Herod built his palace up on the top part of that over by the Jaffa Gate. Here on the other side, we can see the Mount of Olives we talked about in the very beginning. You see the Temple Mount. This is the eastern side coming down to this beautiful valley, the Kidron Valley, and then it goes up on the other side in the Mount of Olives. So Muslims are buried over by the wall, as we talked about in the very beginning. Christians were buried here in the valley, and then Jewish people are buried on the Mount of Olives itself. Here's that other valley. We talked about this one earlier from the Dung Gate. It's called the Hinnom Valley, or Hell, Gehenna. And so this was the old valley that was made into hell, but the Israelis have transformed it into a beautiful park. However, I was there during the Intifada when hell was on fire again. It was Palestinians burning tires in protest to the occupation. So kind of interesting. Over on the Mount of Olives, you can see these beautiful olive trees. This is in the Roman Catholic Garden of Gethsemane. Some of those trees are very, very old, probably don't go right back to the time of Jesus, but the roots probably do go back to the time of Jesus. And so this is a beautiful church called the Church of All Nations, built to commemorate Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. There's the Mount of Olives, very pretty, about 400 feet higher than Jerusalem. It has a lot of different churches. This one is interesting, originally built by Constantine's mother Helena to commemorate the prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. That's not very popular today. So they've changed it to Paternoster, the Lord's Prayer Church, and it has the Lord's Prayer in over 140 different languages. So you can go and check out English and Greek, Hebrew. I'm part Cherokee. My last name is Moore, so I kind of like that one. They conveniently had Moore and Cherokee next to each other as languages. I didn't even know there was a Moore language, but anyway, I got to get my picture by it. This is one of my favorite churches. This is called Dominus Flavit, the Lord wept, because it was built to commemorate Jesus weeping over Jerusalem as he comes down. And so you could actually see Jerusalem from there. You're actually looking down on Jerusalem, and Jesus gave quite a prophecy there. This church is actually built by Antonia Fortress, and it's built in the shape of a tear because Jesus cried over Jerusalem. And then if you look carefully, there's tear bottles on the four sides of the church. And we have this little Roman glass tear bottle up here tonight. And so it was commemorating Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. And I call it the chicken church because Jesus actually spoke here and said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate." That was the last time Jesus walked in the temple. They've now rejected him. They're now arranging for his death. And he says, your house. Before it was always my Father's house. Now he says, your house is desolate because he's removed his presence. And it's just a matter of time until the unthinkable would happen. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings," right? They'd heard Jesus tell a story. Remember the story? There was a woman that came. Everybody's throwing in big coins. They're throwing in gold coins, and they're throwing in shekels and half shekels and denarius. And she came in, what did she throw in? 2 little tiny, we call them mites, leptons, the thin ones. I'll show you some of those tomorrow night or Tuesday night. She threw in 2 little leptons, 1/64 of a day's wage, 128 of them in a day's wage. And Jesus said, she gave more than anybody else. The guys are kind of smarting on this. They're saying, "Lord, you may be a great teacher, but you are not good at economics at all. 1/64 of a day's work, and that's more than all these gold coins that the other people are throwing in." So as they're leaving the temple, "Look, Jesus, look at these massive stones. Look at this incredible building. Isn't this great?" And Jesus shocks them because they're now up and they're looking down and seeing the temple. And Jesus says, the time is coming when it's all going to be destroyed and they will not leave one stone upon another. They are just shocked. Pooh, can you imagine? This is the heart of their heart and soul of everything, and it can't be. And then he gives a cryptic sign. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those in the city get out. and let those in the country not enter the city. He gives a sign. He says, you're going to see Jerusalem being surrounded by soldiers. When it happens, you leave. Don't stay. Now, remember the days of Hezekiah when the soldiers were coming? What did the people do? Did they leave Jerusalem? They fled to Jerusalem. You go to the city when there's danger, right? Because there's protection in the city. There's walls. He says, no. This is counterintuitive. You leave when this happens. So what happened? Well, I told you earlier about how that the priest had killed the Syrian representative. And these boys continued, and they overthrew the Romans. Well, there's a guy by the name of Yehuda of Gamla. He doesn't like the Romans ruling over the land. And so he starts quoting Elijah the prophet, that I'm zealous for the Lord. He takes on the name Zealot. Right? And so he's killed, obviously, by Herod Antipas, because Herod Antipas makes his money by keeping peace with the Romans. But his two sons survive. One's named Menachem, and the other's named Eliezer. Menachem comes down and he attacks Masada. He kills all the soldiers in Masada in AD 66. He steals all their weapons. He marches off to Jerusalem and enters Jerusalem as the Messiah, as the Jewish Messiah. I'm not kidding you. Well, he starts a revolt against the Romans. They attack the Romans. The Romans leave the city. Well, the Romans first, Cestius Gallus comes down in response from Syria and surrounds the city, and they attack and they fight, and for some reason, Cestius Gallus withdraws and leaves. That was the sign. That was the sign. He leaves. What do the zealots do? God's given us victory. They chase him, right? Attacking him from the backside. But all the believers in Jesus, they leave the city of Jerusalem. They cross down through the Jordan Valley. They go over to Pella. They go over and live on the other side in the Roman Decapolis. And then we have the return of Titus and his father. And they come down and besiege Jerusalem. Caesar dies. Titus' father has to go back to Rome to secure the throne. And Titus engineers the destruction of Jerusalem. And systematically, the city is destroyed. They surround it. They pound it. They break through in the north. People are fleeing. They're putting them on crosses. They're putting them in olive trees until there's no trees left to hang people. A terrible, terrible time. But the city's strong. It's probably the strongest fortress in all the world, the lower part of the city. And so it's there with those steep walls of the Kidron Valley and the Tripian Valley, and they keep working on it, and finally they make a breach. Titus says, don't destroy the temple. It's the most beautiful building in all the world. Don't destroy it. So they come in. Well, the zealots, according to Josephus, they have a prophecy that says God will deliver us from the sanctuary. So they retreat into the sanctuary. And they're fighting from inside the sanctuary. And finally, a Roman soldier gets so fed up with it, he shoots some fire in there, and it catches the cedar on fire. The cedar just explodes. The oil stored in the temple explodes. The gold and silver in the temple melt. And it's a terrible conflagration that follows, and incredible death that follows. After it's all done, this fire was so hot, Josephus describes how they could hear big explosions going on. It's all limestone. The water in the limestone was bubbling and heating and boiling until the rocks would actually explode. They pushed all of the stones off the Temple Mount. Now remember, I told you something for a reason a moment ago. Here's this rock. Herod wants to double the size. He wants to make it out to here, right? To do that, he had to build these false walls in here. He has a platform on the top, and that's where the temple is built. Now the Romans push everything off the top of that platform, and it falls down, falls down so far that it breaks into the street down here, that Jesus walked on this street, by the way. And that's not down to bedrock yet. There's sewers underneath that. You can actually crawl under them today or walk under them today. And see all the stones? The good stones got used into other buildings. The bad stones got just left there, and they were there until about 30 years ago when they were uncovered by the archaeologists. So today, you can actually walk and you can touch those stones They were thrown down in fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy. Not one stone would be left upon another. It happened. It happened, didn't it? Incredible. Just like Jesus said it was going to happen. So Jewish people come today, and they come to the Western Wall, right? Now remember, what is that Western Wall? It goes up about 100 feet, and the platform where the rock's over here, and there's open areas here, sits on that, right? So that's not part of the temple itself. It's just part of the structural wall that held up the platform where the temple was built. Some people get very confused about that. So they come here. Now in the past, when the Christians were in charge, and when the Muslims were in charge, they didn't let the Jewish people come there every day to pray. They could only come one day a year. I happened to be there in July as we were filming the Footsteps of Jesus series, and it was the most strange thing that ever happened. There were no chairs. Men were laying around on the floor. Somebody would stand up and read something, and Rah! Somebody over here would stand up and read, Rah! There's one day out of the year that commemorates the destruction of the Jewish temple. Conveniently, it happened on the same day both times. It's in July, and they come to wail the loss of their temple. They were reading Lamentations, the book of Lamentations that follows Jeremiah, and they were lamenting and wailing and crying because the temple had been destroyed. Muslims and Christians, when they were in charge, only allowed them to come one day a year, and it was that day when they came to mourn the loss of the temple. Thus, you've heard it always called the what? Wailing Wall. We don't call it the Wailing Wall today because, it's only one day out of the year when they're going to go down and wail. They're going to go down and worship. And so now they've actually expanded all this area, and it's a time of worship. It's an Orthodox. You can see there's no women on that side. There's actually another wall for the women on the other side. Here you can see underneath. I've been down underneath. We were able to take our cameras down and film much of this. And you can see called Solomon's Stables. Doesn't have anything to do with Solomon. It's actually Suleiman's Stables because they keep horses down under there. But that's actually what's underneath it. You can see the little Herodian mark around that stone. So we know it's a Herodian stone built by King Herod. Here's a house destroyed in AD 70. He gives us a vivid reminder of what Jesus had said. Not one stone will be left upon another. Look at that Roman sphere that is there. You see the ash layer. Everything collapsed. This was a priestly workshop named Cathros. And we can kind of see a very interesting fulfillment. Josephus said people were hiding in the sewers. They actually found skeletons in that sewer. Titus was triumphant at destroying Jerusalem and putting down the rebellion. He took the booty, the gold from the Jewish temple, and he went back and he built an arch in Rome to commemorate that. And look at that. You can see it right on the arch. He's bringing the candlestick and bringing the different instruments back. And he takes that booty and he builds a big Colosseum. The Colosseum we know today, he builds it because it was by a colossal statue of Nero, and the name stuck, Colosseum. So the Colosseum is actually built by the Jewish booty, right? 62 years later, in 132 AD, there's a guy, the Jews are chafing under Roman occupation, and so this guy, his name is Simon Bar Kokhba, rebels against the Romans. The leading rabbi, the rabbi who invents modern Judaism is named Akiva. Look it up if you doubt me. Google it. Akiva. Rabbi Akiva invents modern Judaism. Temple's gone. What are you going to do? Right? He invents modern Judaism. He anoints Simon Bar Kokhba as Simon Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, as in the prophecy of Balaam that a star will come out of Jacob. He anoints him as Messiah. Puts him on a horse and leads him through the streets of Jerusalem. Tomorrow night, or Tuesday night, I'll show you a coin. They actually started making a coin. We'll see it in just a moment on the screen. Freedom of Israel. They're trying to rebuild the temple. Well, Rome doesn't like this very much, so Hadrian comes down. And Hadrian, here's some of the coins. You can actually see some of the coins that are actually made. Look at that. Can you see the Jewish temple? He struck these coins saying the freedom of Israel and to build the temple. He starts this revolt. Hadrian responds. He comes down. This time, he doesn't just destroy the city like Titus did. He actually destroys the entire city and scrapes it to bedrock. So when you walk on the old stones of Jerusalem today, you really walk on Hadrian city. It's interesting. This guy, Simon Bar Kokhba, died with a sword in his hand, fighting. Jesus allowed his own life to be taken by saying, "My kingdom is not of this world." What a contrast in Messiah's. What a contrast. Hadrian built the Aelia Capitolina. Aelia was his name, and so the new capital of his family. He built a temple to Jupiter. He put it right up there on the Temple Mount to desecrate the Temple Mount. By the way, he put a temple to Venus on the spot called Calvary to desecrate that. And he put a grove to Adonis in Bethlehem to desecrate the place where Jesus was born. He banned the Jews from coming to Jerusalem. He said, if they come to Jerusalem, we'll kill you immediately. Jews cannot go to Jerusalem. They could just kind of come and look off in the distance and cry and mourn. And by the way, Christians couldn't go to Jerusalem because at this time in history, Christians were considered a sect of the Jews. A sect of the Jews, okay? So they didn't like that very much, so they tried to distinguish themselves from Jews, but that's a different story I can't talk about tonight. Helena, as I said last night, comes in the 4th century, the mother of Constantine, and she searches these out, and she's pointed to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to that spot, that temple to Venus, and she builds the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In AD 614, the Persians come from Persia or Iran, and they conquer the city, destroy the Christians in there. They kill about 60,000 Christians, put the others out into slavery. It's decimated. And then 8 years later, the Christians retake the city, and then 8 years after that, the Muslims come at the gates. They're so weakened that the Muslim invaders come from Arabia and take the city of Jerusalem. And we have what's called a jihad, a struggle for the Jerusalem going back and forth during the Crusades, back and forth. And so we see that this is a holy city to the Muslims because they believe Muhammad went to heaven from that rock. Christians and Jews believe that's the rock where Abraham would have brought Isaac and where Solomon's temple was built. This is a beautiful building built by the conqueror of Jerusalem, Omar, in the 7th century to commemorate Muhammad's journey to heaven from that spot. Beautiful Persian tiles, gold dome, and so on. A fabulous building. It was Hakim comes along, and Hakim is a Muslim ruler in 1009, and he's kind of insane. And he actually destroys the holy places. He chops down the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, chops down the tomb of Jesus. And so something is launched called the Crusades to open the holy places to Christians again. That's what launches the Crusades, by the way, is this atrocity that happens there. Salah ad-Din captures the city in 1187. It goes back into Muslim hands, and it remained that way for a long time. As I said, the current walls were built in the 16th century. It's called El-Quds, the Holy One by the Muslims, and that commemorates their belief that Muhammad went to heaven from that rock. Jews have a different belief about that. A quarter of a mile away is another holy rock that Christians believe that Jesus was crucified at, and Jesus was put into the tomb and came back to life. It's a moving thing to go there and see that. So again, the Jewish temple had stood there. Jews come here to remember the loss of their temple. They come here to pray. It's the closest place they can go. Today there's a lot of confusion, but the chief rabbi tells Jewish people not to go on the Temple Mount. You do not know where the holy place was, and you don't want to desecrate it by going there. And so they come and they pray here, and it's a moving thing to go and pray with them and to leave your prayers there and to see that. It's a moving thing to go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre about a quarter of a mile away, where we see the 6 different denominations that are keeping alive the memory that Jesus was crucified and came back to life. We know that Jesus prayed here on the Mount of Olives, perhaps it was by those olive trees, and he was praying, "Not my will, but your will be done." And what a contrast. Jesus was actually led down this set of steps. It's actually a set of steps from the 2nd century. He was tried. Perhaps he was tried here. This is where we're pointing to St. Peter in Gallicantu. My 10-year-old son is standing there in the courtyard where perhaps Simon Peter was warming himself when they said, "You are one of his followers?" And he said, "No, I don't even know the man," and denied knowing him. Jesus was arrested, taken up to that place, and then he was tried several times that night, and ultimately Pilate washes his hands and said, "I find no fault in him," yet sends him out to be crucified, bearing his cross. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built probably on the spot where this happened. Then there's a 2nd-story chapel. It's an Orthodox chapel, as you can see, to commemorate that. There's a little stone of unction down below. This is the tomb, the traditional tomb of Jesus. Very moving to go there. Now again, it was all chopped down by Hakim. The Russian czars gave that building to go be built over it again. It was recently cleaned and reopened. Very moving thing to go. This is actually in the tomb of Jesus. As you can see, the marbles on top of it. They broke the marble so the marble wouldn't be taken to other buildings, by the way, to be used. So a very special thing. It's interesting. The Christians are there, but a Muslim keeps the keys every night. He comes like his grandfathers and great-grandfathers had done since the time of Salah ad-Din, locks it, and then comes down the ladder and gives the ladder back to the Christians, saying that you have charge, but I'm going to let you in or out. And so he comes back the next morning and opens it. So it's a moving thing to go there and to see this. The stone of unction, people believe that Jesus might have been anointed there. It's been changed several times, so I wouldn't really latch a lot of confidence into that. But this most likely is the tomb of Jesus. Now, many Christians don't look here, they look somewhere else, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Here we can see first century tombs. So we know this was a cemetery at the time of Jesus, in the building, in the walls of the building, but many Protestants especially like to go to the garden tomb. And I'll be honest, I like to go to the garden tomb too, because here it's more like a garden. It's not full of incense and candles and so on, and so it's very easy to go back and remember. And there is a tomb there, and off in the distance you can see kind of those two eye sockets. Can you make that out? It looks like a skull, place of a skull. And so it's very moving to go there to the garden tomb. Some of that's falling apart today. The little bridge between the nose, the eyes is gone. But it really doesn't matter to me whether it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or if it's the garden tomb. It doesn't matter to me which place it was, because the sign on the door at the garden tomb says it all for me. He is not here, for he is risen. I don't worship the stones, right? But the story is true. And as I go there, it reminds me the story is true, that Jesus experienced death, broke the bonds of death, and came back to life. Wow. And that's what it's all about as a follower of Jesus. Now here you can kind of see this model, and you can see where the wall was in the days of Jesus. You can see that kind of big stone there, and the idea was that there was a quarry back in the 5th century, and then the quarry was abandoned. There was a piece of stone that was no good, and they left it there. And it became a garden in the time of King Herod it's called the Garden Gate, actually, the Gineth Gate. You can see the road going by. There was no Damascus Gate at that point. And that became the place where they built that temple to Venus, and then they built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now here's something from the model map, and maybe we'll talk about that on Wednesday night. The model map is the earliest map of the Bible lands, but it shows Jerusalem as the city of the world, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the center of Jerusalem. It's called the City of Peace, but as we've said, not many cities subject to more war or conflict or bloodshed than Jerusalem. And so we ask the question tonight, will there be peace in Jerusalem? I don't know about you, but I pray for the peace of Jerusalem every day. We should pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but I do realize that unless there's peace in the hearts of the people in Jerusalem, there will not be peace in Jerusalem. So I pray for the people of Jerusalem. I also realize unless there's peace in the hearts of people in Battle Creek, there won't be peace in Battle Creek either. I also realize that there's families that are divided even tonight in this group, right? We have to have peace in our hearts if we're going to have peace in our families, in our communities, in our cities, and in the city of Jerusalem. So I want to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now it's very interesting. Revelation closes with this. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The Bible points us to a new Jerusalem, a heavenly Jerusalem that will live up to its name. Now, today there's still conflict that goes back to the time of Abraham. Still conflict, and we want to pray that God will bring peace into these hearts, that they'll find peace in Jesus. That's the only source of peace. He's real Prince of Peace, isn't he? Augustine wrote a book called The City of God, the early church father. And he said that now that the church is ruling over the earth, this is the New Jerusalem. Interesting theory. But as we look back over time, it's just been full of conflict, right? It's been full of conflict. So we look forward to a new Jerusalem, a new Jerusalem. We can see the Babylonian spearheads. We can see the Romans. We can see what else happened there. I love this little picture that I take whenever I go to that church, Dominus Flevit, the Lord wept on the Mount of Olives, that teardrop church. Because when they kind of built it, they didn't, I don't know if they meant to do it or not, but see what they did? See what's on the altar there? In the window? A cross. And the cross is the only thing that can bring peace to Jerusalem, even to the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock and Muslims. All people need peace. So let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem tonight. Father in heaven, thank you tonight for this opportunity to drift away to a faraway land and a distant time and place. We follow in your footsteps as you've worked mightily in the city of Jerusalem for your people through the ages, and now we see what just seems to be conflict and unending conflict. But we pray that people will find peace in you, Jesus. We know that you're the solution, and we pray that people will find peace in you. Bless those who are trying to share you with other people. Use special ways to try and reach their hearts. We want peace to be in Jerusalem, and we want peace to be in the hearts of the people of Jerusalem. And Lord, I want to also pray for Battle Creek tonight. I want to pray for the people who are here, because I realize we have the same problems we have in Jerusalem. Same problems even in our families and our communities. Bring peace into our hearts, and may that peace spread to other people, I pray. And I pray for the people who are on the minds and thoughts of people even tonight, that you'll touch their hearts and lives and help them to know you, the Prince of Peace. Thank you for hearing our prayer tonight. In the name of Jesus our Lord, amen.